This is Changing the Narrative. I'm David Rives, and we are changing the narrative every week on this podcast. We've been spoon-fed a narrative in our biology class in most public high schools that humans evolved from ape-like ancestors over long periods of time, and that narrative has been pushed as fact, along with these pretty little diagrams that show chimpanzee-like creatures starting to turn upright and start to walk on two legs, and then they basically turn into Neanderthals and then humans, and here we are today having this discussion. With me is Dr. Grady McMurtry to discuss the origin of man and the road to mankind. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure to be with you.
It is great to have you on. You drove in last night, is that correct?
Right.
And then you're headed from here to speak over
I'll be speaking over in East Tennessee.
East Tennessee and on and
to
on.
North Carolina, yes, and on and on.
Isn't that the way it goes? I appreciate you taking the time to be here today and to discuss the road to man, because again, that pretty picture that we see in the textbooks and in National Geographic magazine and on the TV shows that we turn on has been the narrative for, well, generations. But what does the road to man look like?
Well, actually, the idea of the little ape becoming the bigger ape, becoming the human, that diagram became absolutely iconic back in 1960.
Okay.
But it's illusion. It's stage magic. It's not black magic, but it's illusion magic that causes people to take a look at these illustrations and then say, oh, well, yeah, that's the way it happened. Mm-hmm. The truth of the matter is, of course, it is just illusion. It's an artist's rendering. Mm-hmm. And when we take a look at the actual evidence, it's totally contradictory.
I love the way you put it's an illusion, it's stage magic, it's not black magic. You see, if it was black magic, it would be supernatural, and therefore, but what it is it's pseudoscience, isn't it?
Well, it is pseudoscience at best. Actually, what we see are, of course, the bones of dead apes, bones of dead people. You can put them in an alignment that makes it appear acceptable from an illusion standpoint, the tricking of the eye. The fact of the matter is, of course, when they do this, they always have these little illustrations of a little ape becoming the bigger ape, right?
Okay.
I have a question, though, for you. How come they never show you the fish walking out of the water that supposedly became the ape?
Oh, right, because if everything started as a single-celled organism...
And supposedly in water.
Okay.
And supposedly evolved, getting bigger, better, faster, smarter.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the concept. And that life evolved in the water and eventually crawls up onto the land in some way, fashion, or form. I have this wonderful little illustration. I show all these pictures of these apes and people in that alignment that is so iconic.
Yes.
And then I flash a fish with two little legs walking up on the land that became the ape.
Okay.
Because they never show you that.
Right.
It is nothing but stage magic. It's a trick of the eye. And so people have to understand, first of all, where's the proof of it?
Yeah.
It isn't that they have any proof. It's just that they can line objects up by size and shape. This is called the proof by ranking.
Okay.
And to rank something in a logical order, a logical sequence, is a form of, quote, proof, but the fact of the matter is it proves absolutely nothing.
You're saying that we could put a violin and then a ukulele and then a mandolin and then a guitar and then a jumbo guitar and then a bass.
Bass violin.
Right.
And see, that's the proof by ranking is just to put things in a logical order or sequence.
Okay.
It proves nothing that one's related to the other.
Huh.
And so they use a false method of proof. It's an illusion. It's stage magic is what it is. And yet when we take a look at the actual evidence, it contradicts that.
Right.
You see, for instance, when evolutionists attempt to prove that people evolved from apes, they use 4 categories of physical evidence.
Okay.
But what you're looking at are drawings. Those are illusions to draw your eye and think, well, yeah, because it looks logical, but in fact it's not.
Okay. But you said that there are 4 categories that sort of lead people to believe this.
Mm-hmm. The 4 categories. First of all, you have the hoaxes.
Okay.
Such as Piltdown Man. Piltdown Man was a hoax. Peking Man is a hoax. I mean, there's lots of these hoaxes where they have evidence they put together to get people to think that this was real, when in fact it is simply putting different things together, and you have illusion. Mm-hmm. Then you have misrepresentation, which is easily explained. For instance, the tooth of the Nebraska man.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, dug up in Nebraska in 1922. However, by 1927, we had found the rest of the bones, and so what had been identified as Nebraska man, the molar of a pre-human, subhuman, and was illustrated heavily from one tooth. Now, first of all, in the illustrations they used, you see a couple of fully grown creatures, kind of like hairy people, carrying a stick. In the background, there's camels and horses and so forth. But that was all drawn from one tooth.
Wow.
Okay?
Okay.
Then in 1927, digging at the same location, they found out that it wasn't the tooth of a pre-human, subhuman. It was, in fact, the tooth of an extinct species of pig.
So that would be a misrepresentation.
So that's a misrepresentation.
Okay.
But misrepresentations are then corrected. So they misrepresent it to begin with. The tooth was real. Now, Piltdown Man was made out of a skull dug up of a medieval graveyard, the jaw of an orangutan, approximately 500 years old, and chimpanzee teeth. That's a hoax.
Okay.
Now, they knew it was a hoax in 1923, but they didn't admit it to the public until 1953.
Wow.
So they knew it for 30 years. It was a complete and total hoax. The misrepresentation part, again, Nebraska man's tooth, 1922. But when they found out it was the tooth of a species of pigs, they reclassified it, of course. And that's that misrepresentation where they say it's this, but then later it is corrected.
Right.
So that's what science does. Science corrects the errors that existed previously.
And so we would admit that that's good science. Good scientific progress would be...
That's good operational science.
Good operational science is... You look at something, you're going to make a hypothesis, you're going to study it, and for a while you may say, okay, well, we think this is where this is headed, but once you realize that you've made a mistake, you back up, you course correct.
Exactly. And science is all full of course correction.
Okay.
You know, what was thought to be spontaneous generation of rats from rags, was disproven, going back to 1668 with Reddy, for instance. So science is supposed to be self-correcting. So the hoaxes are very obvious.
Yeah.
But they still deceive the public, even though found in 1912, 1913, taken to the British Museum of Natural History, said to be proof of human evolution. In 23, known to be absolutely a hoax even by them, but not admitted for 30 years.
30 years.
1953, they finally admitted it was a hoax.
Okay.
Then the misrepresentations, again, are easily done. The third category of proof would be the bones of dead apes. And we're talking about human evolution here.
Okay.
And so you have the bones of dead apes, and then the fourth category, the bones of dead people.
Okay.
And so there's your four, quote, proof categories. The hoaxes, which have been totally thrown out. Misrepresentations, which are then corrected.
Yes.
And then you have the two categories of the physical evidence, bones of dead apes, and bones of dead people.
And sometimes, and many times, those bones of dead apes and bones of dead humans are lined up as closely as possible to try to prove human evolution.
Right. And of course, evolutionists will say that humans came from the Australopithecines.
Yes. That's
a certain kind of ape, generally in the great ape category.
You and I were talking, last night about South Africa, and you've got the cradle of humankind there, right?
Oh yes, I've been there.
And you've got all of these supposed Homo naledi and all of these other, the Tong child not far from there, and all of these supposed ape-like ancestors. But the Australopithecines are sort of the pinnacle of the proof of human evolution. Things like Lucy, right?
Well, as a matter of fact, I find it interesting. You have a reproduction of the bones of Lucy as were found.
Yes.
And when the evolutionists show these bones, and as you have them, it really kind of looks human-like, right? First of all, there's only 20% of the bones actually there.
Wow.
80% are missing. So when you see these photographs and you say, well, it's a skull and it's some ribs and some arm bones and leg on one side and sort of half a pelvis.
Yeah.
And you look at it, the eye sees it, and you might just kind of fill in the blanks with your own imagination, which is what evolutionists want you to do.
Okay.
But 80% of it is missing to begin with.
Wow.
Initially, it was said to be, 1/6, and then they said, well, no, it isn't. It's the other. So even they themselves are arguing about these things, and they place Lucy because of ash from volcanoes found in the ground, just above the skeleton, or parts of it. But the fact of the matter is, they dated it much older initially.
Okay.
And what they did was, they said, well, that's too old in our way of thinking. It needs to be here. And so what did they do? They kept testing until they finally found a date they liked at about 2.9 million.
Right.
And they threw the rest of them away.
And they weren't testing the bones either, right? This was radiometric dating, so they had to find some type of...
You can't date the bones with that. You have to find something that comes out of a volcano, basically, or is radioactive in some sense.
So they keep looking around for samples of ash near these bones.
And you keep testing, you find the one you like, and then they throw the rest away. Isn't that convenient?
Yes.
I mean, I can prove a lot of things if you'll let me use that method of dating, right?
Yep, just keep going until something matches.
Right. But you'll hear that people came from chimpanzees.
Yeah.
Now, think about that for a second. According to the evolutionary thinking, we came from the Australopithecines.
Okay.
But chimpanzees, and I have a chart to prove this, they used to say that chimpanzees broke off with the human line about 6 million years ago.
Okay.
And went that way.
Okay.
And that we came from the Australopithecines. However, they're constantly changing their minds.
Right.
And then they said, oops, we made a mistake. And they put the separation of chimpanzees from the human evolutionary line back 7 million years in one day.
Wow.
Because they realized that they needed more time to supposedly get the changes that were necessary.
Oh.
But the fact of the matter is, many evolutionists today doubt that we came from the Australopithecines. And this has to do with a lot of the structural differences.
Okay.
But that's the ones they picked, and that's the one they're trying to reinforce.
Right. But at this point, they're kind of grasping at straws because they've picked the ones that they thought would be the easiest to prove this ape-human origin story. And they keep running into roadblocks, and so they say, "Well, either we have to give it more time." But Grady, doesn't this mean that time is the magical component that they just keep sprinkling on until somehow it works?
It's their statement that they make: "Give me enough time, and anything can happen." That's the 8 words they live and die by, and it doesn't matter what it applies to, whether it's the apes to people mythology, or whether it's elephants. It doesn't matter. And their favorite method of proof is the proof by ranking.
Okay.
They simply line things up by size and shape. Now, you and I can disprove that easily right here and right now. As we mentioned earlier, they will take the bones of this creature and line up with the chimpanzee, the orangutan, on to apes, big apes, and then supposedly people. And that's their proof by ranking. But the more we know it's not true.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, evolutionists themselves are very stymied by this. In one day, they actually took 5 of the intermediates, supposedly, including Homo habilis, and lumped them into one. So in one day, they lost 4 supposed intermediates by lumping 5 of them together because they said, well, this is just variation within one kind.
Okay.
And the trick with the evolutionists is they'll find something. Now, remember, you don't get another grant.
Right.
Unless you find something.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
So this is follow the money. And so what they will do is, in order to justify not only the grant they were given, but the next grant they want to keep themselves employed, because this is only the process of how do I keep myself employed, every time they find something, it has to be new and different.
Okay.
Now, think about the variation in mankind between pygmies and Watusis.
True.
All right? That's variation within a kind.
Okay.
Think about dogs. You have your Heinz 57 dog, and then you have your Russian Wolfhound, and you have your, well, we'll say the pygmy dogs like Chihuahuas. But they're all dogs.
Okay.
That's variation within a kind.
But everybody would admit that those are the same kinds living contemporaneously.
They're still dogs.
Okay.
And they're living contemporaneously, but they're still dogs. And all dogs, basically, Heinz 57, unless we have human intervention, where you don't have actually what's called natural selection. What you have is artificial selection.
Okay.
Now, what Darwin saw was artificial selection.
Yes.
But he knew if he called it that nobody would believe. They would say, well, that's just artificial selection.
Right.
And Darwin was living in a time when that was common. The English were, in the 1800s, experimenting with hybrids of all sorts.
Yes.
That's why we have all these different purebred horses and cows and pigs and so forth. Same thing with cats and dogs.
Okay.
And in the time of Darwin, English gentlemen, one of their favorite habits was to breed the most weird-looking pigeon you could find. And so they would breed pigeons that had twice the number of feathers.
Okay.
They had pigeon with no feathers, And so this was just a hobby.
It was a hobby.
Basically, by recombining and eliminating information.
But this is breeding.
But that's just human intervention. That's
right.
Artificial selection.
Okay.
So Darwin was looking at this artificial selection and said he knew if he called it that, nobody would believe in his natural selection or his evolutionary concepts.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why he called it natural selection.
Okay. And
said, no. This had occurred in nature by random chance.
Huh.
Now, with these apes, again, you can line them up by size and shape, but there's no intermediates.
I got you.
And so what we find in the fossil record is everything is what it is.
Yeah.
We don't find anything that's half this or half that. We don't find anything that is in the process of evolution. And today, nobody can point at something, oh, this is evolving. No, it is what it is.
Right. And it is fully functional in that form.
Fully functional as is.
Okay.
And so we never see something with a half-evolved eye.
Right.
And that was one of the great challenges to Darwin.
He admitted this in his book on the origin of species by means of natural selection. But then, and of course, the skeptic then says, Dr. McMurtry, you're cherry picking. You're just only choosing that one sentence. He went on to explain it. Now, what he actually did was he went on to take an entire chapter to say, I realize this is a big problem, but somehow through my models
of faith.
Yes.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, that 6th edition was the only one that had that chapter in it.
Wow.
And because he was so ridiculed by his other evolutionary friends, he took it back out. But he even had in the 6th edition a chapter, and I have a facsimile of that in my collection. But he himself understood that there were flaws in his own theory. But when he published that there were, then his friends made him stop and say, if you say that, people aren't going to believe it. So he had to take it back out.
Okay, and then he went on, because that was really his first famous work, but he went on to talk about the descent of man, where he more specifically talked about humankind and related some humans closer towards apes than others.
Well, yes, and see, that's just it. Again, we're dealing with stage magic. We're dealing with illusion. And so you mentioned Neanderthals. Yeah. They've always been classified as 100% human.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, Neanderthals are more like us than we are.
In what way?
Well, let me explain. The difference between the DNA of Neanderthals, and we have found the DNA inside a pulp of a tooth, for instance, or some material inside a little bone, a little finger in your... And in analyzing that, they're only 0.3% different, so to speak.
Oh, wow.
However, human beings today vary by up to 4.5%. So they are way within the human range.
Yeah, within all of the humans living today, you're saying that there can be several percentage differences.
We're 4.5% different in variation. Again, the pygmy to Watusi, the Oriental versus the Caucasian. And so you have all of these differences of appearance, but we're all human, and we can all interbreed, which is one of the definitions of being the same species.
But when you go to Neanderthals, you're saying that what supposedly is separated by tens of thousands of years is only a fraction of a percent.
Well, first of all, of course, I would deny the tens of thousands of years.
Of course.
But I used to teach evolution, and of course, that's one of the reasons I'm so dangerous. Because I used to be a teacher of evolution, and now I'm a teacher of creation.
Yes.
But the millions and billions of years, and of course do other programs on the geochronometers and the age of the Earth and the universe. But the fact of the matter is, it is only 6,000 years old.
Okay.
What we see is variation within a kind. Yeah. And that variation can be height, width,
yes,
etc.
Okay.
And yet someone from China can marry somebody from Brazil and produce offspring. So that's the definition of a species. And so the fact of the matter is, there is only one human species. We don't have different races.
Right.
The word race in genetics is simply another word for variety.
Okay.
And so when we talk about race or variety, we're talking about within a species.
The humankind in this
humankind.
Okay. And
so the humankind really in taxonomy appears to be at the family level.
Okay.
Of taxonomy.
Okay. Well, wait a second though. We're talking about variation within the humankind when in the classical definition, in the Oxford English definition of race.
But again, race is an alternative word to variety.
That's what I'm saying. Okay, so this is what I'm getting at. But variety, if we have, let's just say, a supreme creator who wanted to allow humans to fill ecological niches, whether that be really hot climates, really cold climates, lots of sun, not very much sun, all of these different types of different diets, right? Then he would have built in the genetic variation for this variety.
And you see, we are all the same color, except for albinos.
Okay.
Albinism is simply the lack of color.
Huh.
But we are all the same color. You, I, the blackest Aborigine or Maori you have ever seen are all the same color. And dark-skinned people don't come from the equatorial parts of the world only.
Right.
Because Maoris are from New Zealand. Eskimos, we think of in the north, are dark-skinned people.
That's right.
So it's not a question of sunlight reaction and so forth at all. I would also point out to you that, again, this variation within a kind is ubiquitous. And again, I don't care whether it's a dachshund, a Great Dane, or whatever. They're all dogs. They're one kind. They're canine. And today we now know that wolves, dogs, coyotes, for instance, and foxes are one kind. They can all interbreed.
Canids.
Yeah, they're just canines.
Okay.
And the same with felines are the biggest. I love felines because you go from a house cat to a liger or a tigon, which is a combination of lions and tigers, because they can interbreed, because they're one kind.
Yes.
Just variations.
Wow.
And so many people attribute evolution with all these different kinds. No, we see a lot of varieties within kinds, but they're still one kind, and in increments can interbreed. Now, what evolutionists have done is you can't line them up by size and shape.
Yes.
The proof by ranking proves absolutely nothing.
And what you've just demonstrated is that holds true when it comes to dogs.
All varieties
holds true when it comes
life.
to cats.
All varieties
holds
of
true
life.
when it comes to humans or apes or anything. This pretty picture that we've seen is an absolute fabrication, which only makes it more palatable for you to try to believe some magical theory of evolution.
It is stage magic. It is illusion. Now, of course, evolutionists have tried to then go to genetics and compare by genetics. Now, you've heard this absolutely fabricated story that we are 99% the same as, say, chimpanzees. And there has never been a time when evolutionists had any proof of that. They just invented it because we have a similarity appearance, a homology.
Yes.
However, in the year 2000, we didn't know the ape genome. We only knew part of the human genome.
Right.
And yet the comparison, even then, in the year 2000, was 95.2% the same.
Okay.
The Human Genome Project wasn't completed until April of 2003.
Right.
We didn't know the ape genome at the time. And so what happened? The more we know, the more difference we know there is.
Okay.
So by the year 2011, we already knew there was a 30% difference. We're only 70% the same as apes in terms of that. But you would expect that. We have the same basic layout.
Yes.
So the same
Of
basic
course.
architecture.
Yeah.
So you would expect similarity. And all life on Earth, I don't care whether it's a single cell or an elephant, all life on Earth shares 25% the same DNA. So you don't start at zero to compare.
Yeah.
But I love to point out that based on what they want to do, comparison of genetics, well, you're 50% the same as a banana.
Yeah.
Now, the last time I looked, a banana is a plant.
We don't share many visual similarities, do we?
No. And yet we are 50% the same, but they exist on photosynthesis, which we don't.
Right.
But when you put a banana on your cereal, is that cannibalism?
Oh my goodness. I never thought about that. Yeah.
You're 60% the same as a chicken. Now, the gospel bird, as it is sometimes referred to.
Yes.
But we're 60% the same as a chicken, but that's a bird.
Right.
But we're a mammal by definition. You keep going on. And I love to make these comparisons. You are 88% the same as a rat, genetically.
As a rat.
As a rat. But we're only 70% the same as a chimpanzee or ape.
So what does that mean?
Now, keep going with that because we're 70% the same as a sea sponge.
Okay.
Now, does that mean that we really are related to, SpongeBob SquarePants? And we're 88% the same genetically as a sea squirt.
Okay.
Now, many people don't know what a sea squirt is. It's actually a very small creature, but it lives in salt water along the coast. When it becomes a baby sea squirt, it swims through the water and it has a brain.
Yeah.
But as an adult, it attaches to the sea floor, converts into a filter feeder like sponges and corals, and the brain dissolves away. So you're 88% the same as a sea squirt or a rat, but only 7% the same as an ape. So which one are you closer to?
That, Dr. Grady McMurtry, that is a pretty telling statement right there. Most people wouldn't want to admit that. Most people would
Not really.
No. The more we learn, the more we realize that the narrative that we've been fed is not true. That
Correct.
there is vast difference, and as science progresses, we see that difference more and more, which means that apes have always been apes, humans have always been humans. Right. There is a distinct difference, and the road to man is through Jesus Christ. It is through the gospel. Thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to having you in the future.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you for joining us on Changing the Narrative. Until next time, keep looking up. I'm David Rives. Truly, the heavens declare the glory of God. Find us on all social platforms to stay informed.